here. We got Dieter and Diane and Eric, all to help keep me honest and keep me awake, I guess, at this age. So anyway, we're glad to have you. And of course, Fearless Flight Live, our mission is to attend to any of those of you who has a fear of flying, or if you happen to know somebody who has a fear of flying, or if you just like to talk about aviation and keep up with it a little bit. So we welcome all of you, and we're here every week, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. I'm sorry, Western time, Pacific, and 9:30 on the East Coast. And if you look on the screen right now, you'll see our little slide there that takes you to our Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather Facebook group, and that's our awesome group of people who have a fear of flying or are out there to support other people doing that. It's getting more and more active as it grows, and so we encourage you. And
it's getting more active again. We're seeing people are starting to fly, and so we're getting more activity. So definitely check it out if you are planning to fly in the next week or month. And Ron, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I was just going to say, on top of that is, the activity, we're starting to see activity out there. Definitely the people seeking 15-minute coaching calls is on the uptick, and I want to encourage you to do that. I still got plenty of room on my calendar to help people out with that. And we're starting to see, we're going to look at the poll tonight, some results, and we're re-asking a similar question. Well, I guess we could talk about the agenda there. That's on the agenda there, if you want to put that back up there. Yeah. That we're going to talk about when people are planning to fly, because I am starting to see some movement, and that's what I'm also experiencing with the people that are doing some coaching now. We're going to continue our series looking at our book, How to Overcome Fear of Flying. Tonight we're going to talk about chapter 2, and then we'll have a interesting article, I think, from the Aviation News Roundup. At first blush, you might think, oh my God, that can't be good news. And then Eric and I are going to talk about what the story behind the story is on that. And then, of course, we always have a request and solicit your questions. And if you have them and we can get to them during the course of the show, we'll do that. Otherwise, we will either answer them privately or we'll put them on the agenda for next week. So let's move on into the poll question.
Yeah. So okay. This is a really cool, I just grabbed this minutes before the show. And basically, we just had this up, I think, on January 4th. And you can see that there was, on January 4th, there was a lot of confidence that traveling by spring break 2021 was, kind of like on the forefront. And, I'm wondering, has anything changed for any of you? So even if you have taken the poll question before, or if you haven't at all, I put the link into the description as well as the comments here. And I want to say hi to Ellie. Hi, Ellie, and Sue, and Jim, and Susan, Gilbert, and Elaine. Hey, guys, thanks so much for coming on tonight. And yeah, let us know. Has anything changed in your mind, based on changes in, political leadership, changes in how the vaccines are actually being rolled out all over the world? And yeah, I mean, I can tell from Canada, we have really, as a country, made an interesting decision over the next few months. And if there's time, I'm happy to share. But otherwise, Ron, let's just
look. And so it doesn't matter if they've taken it before, they can get in there and give us their opinion again, because there's a lot going on now with all the vaccines and the delivery and the issues, particularly in the United States here. So it'll be interesting to see people, and I'm hearing that again in the coaching calls that I'm doing. People are finding their attitudes changing about this. The COVID fears seem to be diminishing now. There's a sense of optimism. And I want to reiterate what I've heard in the news too. Just because things are getting better, don't quit doing what you've been doing. The worst landings I've ever made have been right on the heels of a really, really good one. So don't quit doing what works. and keep the momentum up there. Okay,
did you ever,
next slide.
Ron, did you ever bet the first officer on landings to make the trip more fun? That's when I would make my worst ones, when I was betting the first officer on who was going to grease one and who was going to pound one.
Oh my God, I'm already waiting for Susan Miglacio's comment here. So Susan, I'm sure.
It makes it way more fun.
Yeah, but we also want to share something really cool tonight. And that is, before Ron, you're going to go into chapter 2 real quick and give us a laser kind of summary of that. I wanted to share
the book. That's the next slide. We want to talk about the book and thank everybody for the testimonials that they've given. Oh my gosh, that's huge. And Dieter was just saying, you know, once you hit 30 ratings, which believe it or not is a very difficult number to attain, there's an algorithm that they use that counts for, you know, as Dieter put it, exceeding the number of your immediate family. So they know that you didn't stuff the ballot box. And so we really do want to thank people out there. We got our one-star review down there. So, but we got that out of the way early there. And there's a whole story we could tell about that, but we're not going to go into that. So anyway, but thanks for all the really positive reviews there. Yeah.
Oh, Elaine, I'm so sorry.
Bought the book, or you haven't.
Elaine said her review got rejected. So I'm sorry to hear that. I'm just gonna say that's probably because Amazon somehow associated you with FearlessFlight. but this is exactly kind of like what every one of us that's out there helping in some way, shape, or form is up. So if you haven't left a review, what I would recommend, if you are really, you know, like Elaine, open up the browser in, you know, if it's Chrome and an incognito window, because that kind of clears all of your history. And whether it's Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, they can't really see what you're doing the same way as if you were in your regular browser window. So anyhow, I'm just super, super grateful. But Ron, there's Susan is flying or wanting to fly in spring, Susan Miglaccio, and then Tracy's last week of June, first time in 23 years. Whoa, and her current motto is terrified. So I hope at the end of the show, at the end of walkthrough, we're gonna get you to terrified and looking forward to it, right? So that would be a great next step, Tracy. All right, Ron, are you ready to roll in there?
Yeah, so Tracy will, and anyone else out there like Tracy, give us a date and give us all the information, and we'll keep an eye on you. Okay, so here we go. Let me catch up with my notes here. So
the biology of fear.
So here's one of the I got this. I had 5 coaching calls this week, and every one of them, when we talk about it, I talk about mechanical fears, you know, related to the crashing, dying, and things like that, the physical aspects of flying the airplane, and then emotional, you know, worried about when they shut the door, losing control, things like that. And I have people say, "Well, I'm not worried about crashing and all that because, you know, I'm just worried about losing control and all that myself, and therefore I just don't worry about things like that." And but everybody tells me, you know, on some level they know that flying is safe and it's not logical to have a fear of flying. But then they pose the question, why do I get so freaked out? And the answer is, tonight we're going to talk about that in chapter 2, and hopefully you'll get some insights after you get done with that. It's because it's not a logical problem. All right. We learned in chapter 1 that our mind has a mind of its own, so to speak. In chapter 2, we're gonna talk about the fact that the force that drives your mind is your thinking, and with that comes a quote that I've become fond of: "You can't solve an inside problem with an outside solution. You can't solve problems worrying about turbulence by scheduling flights in which there's no turbulence. You know, first of all, it's an impossibility, but second of all, it wouldn't make the difference. Something else will freak you out. It takes place here between your ears. That's where the problems reside. And no matter how much you think, or in the case of fear of flying, worry about something, you can't make it go away." Fear versus anxiety versus worry. Those are three words that we use almost interchangeably when we talk about people with phobias and anxiety disorders. Fear is when you come face to face with a bear, and this is right out of the book. It's a clear and present danger. You know that if you don't do something, there's a possibility of injury or death. And so your very survival comes into question when we think of fear. Anxiety is a state of mind that results once you survive the bear attack, and now you get home and over the weekend and into next week, now you start thinking, your mind starts playing that back and think, what if? Very, very similar to flying. People think about, what about this? What about this? What if this happens? And that's where anxiety comes from. And I like to say that worry is the legacy of anxiety. It's what results when we dwell on difficulty or troubles. And all three conditions, the thing about them that they share is they share the same biological structure regardless as to whether the threat is real or imagined. So it doesn't matter whether it's real or imagined, we worry about it the same way. And the purpose of anxiety, I've come to believe with people, it makes you feel like you're doing something. So we can't say that worry is senseless, and people do that a lot, and they tend to judge themselves and overjudge themselves. But worry, at least in our uninformed and uneducated phase, it provides the feeling that we're doing something. We're trying to solve the problem, even if there isn't one that exists there. Fear defies logic. We talked about that in chapter 1. It's an emotional, fear is an emotion. It activates a biological response, which is what the theme of chapter 2 is about. And it's all about biology. It doesn't involve, it's not thought that is the problem. It's the emotion and the biology that gets triggered. So that's why when you're faced with an anxiety disorder, it defies logic, and thinking doesn't help per se. Here's a graph right out of the graphic right out of the book there, the biology of fear. The biology of fear is to keep us alive. The main purpose of our fear mechanism in our brain is to keep us alive by alerting our attention to potential dangers, whether they're real or imagined. Again, we don't make that distinction. They all have the same impact on us. It activates our survival instinct, or our so-called fight, flight, or freeze response, and it uses brain chemistry to alert us of that. And you can see up there, we've summarized some of the primary benefits or the mainstays supporting the biology of fear. It activates our survival instinct, and it does this using brain chemistry. One of the most phenomenal chemistry sets in the world is in the human brain. The amygdala is the ultimate center for triggering our anxiety or our fight or flight response. And there are two pathways to anxiety. The one is automatically by the amygdala, which is a part of the brain. You can see it down there at the end of the arrow there. It's almond-sized and almond-shaped. There's actually two of them. And the word amygdala comes from the Greek, which means almond, and it's almond-shaped. So you can automatically trigger the amygdala with innate fears like falling, snakes, loud noises, and feeling trapped. So that means that you don't have to have a thought. You just feel fear. And you know that. You walk into situations and all of a sudden you get that hungover, that dreadful feeling. Many of you get it when we shut the door on the airplane. And that's perhaps from the fact that we don't like to be closed in or feel trapped as human beings. The second pathway is cognitively by the prefrontal cortex, and you can see up there that's in purple. That's the part of the brain that generates from which we think, and we have thoughts that generate feelings that then are picked up by the amygdala. So the amygdala has not only sends out signals, but it also has a network of receiving signals. So it's monitoring your thoughts all the while, and when the prefrontal cortex can initiate a fear response. But regardless of whether it initiated automatically through the amygdala itself or as a result of the prefrontal cortex of you having a thought, the energizer for the fear center is the amygdala. And so it doesn't matter which pathway you get triggered on. The bottom line is fear of flying sucks for you. So Now, I put this up there just to kind of highlight some of the roles of the PFC, the prefrontal cortex. And it does all these very sophisticated things. This was the latecomer in the evolutionary stage of the brain. This is the last stage of the brain. It was the part that's up here, right over our eyeballs there. It weighs itself. It added about 1.33 pounds to the weight of the brain. So it was about a 50% increase in the brain. And it's where consciousness exists. That's the part of we talked about that a little bit last week. That's the part of us that not only has the experience, but can have the sense of watching us have our own experience. So it does all of these sophisticated things there. It's where personality resides. It's where recall to the memory is. Now there's other parts of the brain that actually store some aspects of memory, but the prefrontal cortex is the one that's kind of like the central control over that. And it has some other organizing features. It's the higher part of our brain which separates us from the other animals.
Ron, let me just jump in here. Susan has a really interesting question about the amygdala, and that is, can we shrink the amygdala? And I'm going to say, probably the question is, if the amygdala is part of the problem, if it were smaller, would the problem also be smaller? I think that's what the question implies.
Okay.
So
A,
do you want to do that? And B, is that even a good idea? Can you do that?
Yes, you do. And they have actually done studies to show that people with larger amygdalas are more prone to anxiety. And one of the benefits of mindfulness and meditation is it actually does shrink the amygdala. That's a very insightful question, and it's a very functional one. So do you have control over that? Not in the way that I was growing up, but you definitely do if you stick with us and you get into mindfulness and learning how to meditate. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to go off and spend 40 years in a cave either. You know, you can just spend 10 minutes every day and you will find benefits to that. And the benefits aren't solely to work on anxiety and other things like that. There are many, many more benefits than we could ever cover in the short time that we're going to devote to it tonight. But that's a great question, Susan.
Ron, I was thinking that exact thing, but in a more insane way. Have you ever read any studies about head shrinkers studying somebody who had an inoperative, not installed, or completely non-functioning amygdala? I mean,
yes.
Does that make them like the fourth stage of tequila where they're invincible, or what happens?
It makes them completely apathetic. One of the most famous studies about the amygdala was an attorney who had epilepsy, and one of the I don't know if they still do that. I think they still do it in some cases where the initiation of an epileptic seizure starts in one hemisphere, and when it's transferred across to the other hemisphere is when they get the seizure. And so they have a procedure where they actually divide the brain into split hemispheres, and there's no connection. And so that enabled them, until we got the MRIs and fMRIs, a lot of the knowledge about the brain either came from an autopsy afterwards or from people who had problems like this attorney. And one of the anecdotes that I read, the psychologist who was working with this poor fella, they got to the end of a session and he said, well, do you want to come back in next week? And the fellow said, yeah. And he said, well, I've got Tuesday and Thursday open, for example. And the guy could go over all the whys and wherefores as to what the benefits were of each day and what the reasons he wouldn't do it, but he could not make a choice. So people really lose that. I read about a couple. The husband had been in an accident and it neutralized his amygdala basically, and he became completely apathetic because the amygdala doesn't just store fearful memories, it also stores joy. So a lot of the richness of life comes from that spectrum of that.
And
but
Ron,
you're right.
Let me just get in there as a therapist. I can tell you, Eric, and you watching this, that if you how can I say that? If you allow yourself to feel the fear, okay, that shrinking, we can't do it directly, but we can do it indirectly through mindfulness. And like Ron indicated, you can eat mindfully, you can brush your teeth mindfully. The point is to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which then allows you to come into a more kind of grounded place. Okay. And I love what Susan Hopkins, Ron, said, I need my amygdala removed.
That's kind of what I was applying. I was saying, is that practical, or is it just, or is tequila the next best?
No, because think of drugs, think of Ritalin, think of all these drugs that are supposed to help you regulate your mood. What they're doing is, if you think of a wave, a sine wave, they're capping each side of that imaginary line. So you won't maybe feel as anxious, but you certainly won't feel really
as joyous
and engaged in life, because that's what the medication is trying to regulate for us.
To regulate mood.
Yeah.
So stick with us. When we get to part 3 of the book, we're going to talk about meditation and mindfulness. And as much as highly as I recommend doing 10 minutes every day, and I particularly choose to do it in the morning, there's other times during the day, like the flight harmonizer. It's nice to listen to it at night. It's nice to listen to it in the morning, but the most effective use of the harmonizer is to listen to it when your anxiety comes up during the day, just long enough until you notice that your attention is coming back under your control. So mindfulness will have some activities called transitional mindfulness that will take advantage of that same strategy in both. We'll talk about that in the latter chapters of the book, and we'll also talk. You'll also see that coming out in our new NeuroSync series of meditations, where we're gonna be integrating a lot of these other strategies in there. So, okay, so the next slide what we want to move on to is we want to give the amygdala equal billing here, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, but these are just some of the things that the amygdala does. I'm not going to go through them all of them down there, but you see it modulates all of our reactions to events related to our survival. That's probably the most important one. And it gives us the ability to feel certain emotions and perceive them in others. And so it's just an amazing organ. And again, there are 2 of them. And I like to think that's how important Mother Nature thought the amygdala was, because she gave us one and a backup, because it does add the richness of life. It's what makes us the emotional beings we are. So, okay. You may recall I used the analogy of a smoke detector to describe the amygdala, or the fear center of the brain. Remember that? It detects smoke. It can't tell the difference between burnt toast or raging fire, and the response is automatic. And attention getting. And what's the attention? The most annoying sound that an engineer could think of. Why? Because he does not want you to mistake that or miss that if that goes off in your house, particularly in the middle of the night. And if we look at the parallel or the analogy with the brain, you can say that the smoke detector, your smoke detector, is the amygdala. And you can go to the next slide there, Dieter, if you want to. It also detects a threat. It can't tell the difference between whether the threat is real or imagined. Its response is automatic. You have no control over that. So you can get rid of that as a goal ever. You're always going to have anxiety. You're always going to be triggered. What your choices are is how you choose to respond. And until you learn some strategies and get some skills, you're pretty much going to be relegated to the same experience you had last time, if it's related to fear of flying or another phobia like that. And the part of the annoying equivalent to the alarm on a smoke detector is your attention, your inner voice. It's that annoying part of you. Sometimes you hear it. Sometimes it just kind of reverberates in a feeling like, my God, if I feel this badly, certainly there must be some validity to the fact that I'm really in danger. Not true. And Oprah had, one of her themes on her show over the years was, admittedly, to women who had been in bad relationships and had some signs that maybe they should have seen as warning signs. And she said, always listen to that inner voice. And while I agree with her in principle on some things, but it's not a good idea, because your inner voice lies like hell to you all the time. Okay, particularly when it's involved with things it knows nothing about. And the prefrontal cortex of your brain will make something up. It'll make a story up to support that inner voice, no matter how erroneous it is in times. So you really need to do some educating, which is the one of the pillars of our Fearless Flight method. Okay, key takeaways from chapter 2. Our anxiety is driven by biology. That's why you cannot think your way through it. Thinking is a part of it. Educating yourself to help the PFC originating triggers that cause you to get anxious, but the ones that are automatic, the automatic ones from your amygdala, those are all driven by biology. There are two pathways. We talked about those. One is the cortex through thinking, and the other one is the amygdala through just being a human being. We have an inner voice that's constantly interpreting our reality and giving you messages. And for me, sometimes I've got 3 of them, I swear. So if anybody needs one, I'm willing to loan one. Anxiety is the feeling is the feeling of not feeling safe, and it doesn't matter what triggers it. Once it's triggered, it sets up a biological cascade like a waterfall, and you're off and running. We're born with the ability to get aroused, and I don't mean just sexually. That means our level of engagement. We think about arousal in terms of sexual activity for most of us, but really arousal is something that we use on a regular basis. When I'm going to compete in some kind of a sport, I don't want to be just sitting there dead calm before the contest starts. I want to be elevated so that my vigilance is heightened, my awareness is heightened, and so I play a better game when my level of arousal is up. So it's a myth that we want to, flatline, I like to say, is that you're dead if you're flatline. So we don't want that. We're usually just bobbing around a little bit like this, but anxiety for most of you related to flying, you hit some turbulence and all of a sudden, boom, your anxiety spikes, as would mine, believe it or not, even with 20,000 hours of flying time. But the difference in mine is mine goes up, and because I've been there before, it comes back down in a relatively short order. Yours goes up and it gets stuck there. And so this is what we're trying to do, is prevent you from getting stuck. We can't ever change your level of a startle response. The only way we do that is to kill you. And we don't do that because it's bad for business over the long term.
Hey, real quick, there's a message, Ron. You said anxiety is the feeling of, can you just repeat that? Somebody just sent a message in chat.
Well, the last thing I said was anxiety is what results from not feeling safe.
Okay, so anxiety is the feeling of not feeling safe, I think was the person they were just asking about exactly this.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. And fear is when you don't feel safe as well. They both use the same biological network in there. That's why you can't, and the amygdala is not able to distinguish between anxiety, fear, and just simple old worry. And the last thing is, we're born with the ability to get aroused. You come out of the womb, they may or may not slap you on the bottom to get you elevated, and you started to cry. The part of that's all natural. Nobody has to teach you that. That's innate. The part that we don't get, and we get through nurturing, is the 3 things. We get the sense of comfort from being held, which is touch. We get the sense of calm, the tone of voice from mom, and eye contact. And those are the 3 things that very few of us got as much as we could have used. I don't think you can get too much of that. And so oftentimes a lot of people tell me, well, I don't think I was ever traumatized or anything like that. We don't know, because we don't know from the first 6 years of our life much about what our inner experience was, because our brain wasn't developed enough to do that. So bottom line there is, yes, you can learn to calm yourself. Okay. Next week, if you come back and stick with us, we'll be discussing chapter 3. Be sure to come back and join us. And the last thing we want to do, let's just do this real quick, is we had in the news there, we're going to talk about this chapter 3, the stories we tell ourselves. There was an article on my feed this week, talked about airline pilots making in-flight errors, and it had a couple of examples, and they talked about, they attributed the writer, I don't know whether he was a pilot or whatever, but he attributed that to some pilots saying that they had been off, not flying for a while, and they got rusty. Okay, so that may not be good news to you out there as a fearful flyer, but we want you to think about a couple other things, and I'll engage Eric in more of a conversation here. So Eric, how would they even know that these pilots made errors if they didn't show up in a crash, in an accident?
We have a really neat program called the Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASRS, that was instituted in 1976. And
administered by NASA, the bright people
yes,
at NASA. Yeah.
They were a third party that kept reporting crews anonymous, and they were using it to track mistakes and trends to help the FAA make corrections to procedures, checklists, training, instead of going the punitive track, which was the not so kind and gentle FAA before then. Pilots would hide mistakes as best they could, lie about stuff, do all manner of things. So there really wasn't good tracking of errors being made. Under the aviation reporting system, if pilots admitted the error, as long as it wasn't an intentional violation of regs or something really egregious and stupid, they would get a degree, usually total immunity from making the mistake if they reported it before it was discovered by a third party, like the company or the FAA, which motivated them to send in a detailed description of what happened. Once lots of data started coming in, it could be analyzed, and NASA and companies could say, oh, this is a mistake we're making over and over and over. How can we change our procedures or checklists or flows to minimize this and help root this out, or training? And so they could attack individual problems when the flight crews reported this stuff with a degree of impunity and train to correct these things. And one example I gave, was talking with Ron earlier, there was a takeoff in Detroit in the 80s where the plane took off with the wing flaps retracted and it did crash with disastrous results. And one of the changes made there, a couple of changes, industry-wide, mechanically, the airplanes hooked the wing flap system into what's called the takeoff warning horn. So if thrust was advanced to the takeoff range with the flaps retracted, a very loud warning horn would come off saying, hey, the airplane's not ready to fly. And the other thing was simpler, just having the first officer extend the flaps at the gate so the airplane was taxiing with the flaps in the takeoff position, so that in the event of things getting rushed or jammed at the runway, it wouldn't be something that they could forget. That was a direct result of that accident and a change made because of that. And these errors are being found by flight crews reporting them, and can be addressed.
So let me give just a little bit of the history behind that. So in the 70s, when this came into being, it came as a result of the fact that we didn't like what was going on in the airline industry. We were having a lot more accidents, a lot more pilot error, and a lot of fatalities associated with that. And then someone had this idea: what if we allow pilots to tell their mistakes? Because here's the problem: as we've gotten safer and safer and safer, one of the things you need to predict where your shortcomings are in aviation safety or in any kind of operational safety is you do that by plotting accidents, right? So if you get to the point where we're at today, where we simply don't have accidents anymore, you become vulnerable on a large scale to knowing what's going on out there. What are the areas that we need to give attention to? And so by telling on myself, when I make a mistake that otherwise would never have been known by anybody other than maybe the guy that I'm flying with that day, the other pilot, or it wasn't consequential, I am feeding into a database. Now I have some plotting points along there, and to do just exactly as Eric suggested, we can see whether that was an isolated incident and perhaps just a little bit of counseling or coaching to pilots would help on that, or we can see whether it's a trend and change the way that we're doing business with that. And that's the beauty of it. When I went through my surgery here in December, I can't tell you, and those of you who've been in a hospital, the number of times that first thing they do, I mean, it is absolutely imperative. You get this little ID bracelet, plastic bracelet ID in there with your name and your birth date. And every time somebody would come into they could have just walked out of the room and now they're coming back in to take my blood pressure or something. First thing they would say is, what's your name? what's your date of birth, and they would verify that on their records as well as on mine. That I'm gonna make a bold statement here. That may not have come directly from aviation safety, but in the mid 80s, the first one that I know of that looked into this was Banner Health Systems, and they started to come and approach us in the aviation industry, and they said, "Hey, what's this thing about you telling on yourself and all that?" And they have some different problems with liability and things like that, but I know many hospitals now have a review part for the staff, and they can go in and they can process similar things in there. So that's why aviation is so safe. So yeah, so you got a writer that makes a big deal out of this about pilots making mistake and it's all due to COVID and all that. But the rich part of that for me is, yeah, we wouldn't even know about that though unless pilots were telling upon themselves. So anyway, another reason you should be out there flying. All right. So, any other final words from anybody or question? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. I overrode Diane. Flight attendants, mechanics, anybody that comes in contact with the airplane in the aviation industry also is automatically enrolled in that program. So, Diane, I think you said that you actually filled out an ASRS report.
Yeah, we have the same method of telling on ourselves or reporting an error. It's not just the pilots. And of course, those that we make are probably not quite as consequential as those that the pilots might make. But certainly it's the same philosophy that it's better that we let someone know about it without the fear of being punished than not.
And the beauty of it is, to me, is you don't even have to make the decision whether it's consequential or not. That's the important thing. Yeah. And same way with pilots. We don't have to make that decision. We just say what happened, what was my experience, and we pass it up so that many more eyes come in contact with it. So anyway. Okay, another great week. I enjoyed myself. I hope you did. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Dieter. Thanks, Eric. And we will see you back here next week for another episode of Fearless Flight Live. So have a great week. Stay safe, and let's get back into the air. Good night.
See you guys.
Everybody.